Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, a bonus episode recorded here at the eduWeb Summit, taking place in sunny Orlando, Florida. Beautiful day. Heat's kind of broken. I was here over the weekend, and it's pretty rough out there, but excited to be here on a beautiful day, chatting with Dan from Amherst. So if you want to briefly introduce yourself, your role at Amherst, and a little bit about your background and what's bringing you to the summit this year.
Yeah, so I'm Dan Desrochers, Director of Communications and Student Affairs at Amherst College. I've worked in higher ed for nearly a decade now. Work has been across private and public education, really runs the gamut. I started institutional-wide, and then I've actually moved into this more embedded role, which was actually a shift. Usually you go the other way. But even before that, I worked as a journalist and even as an EMT for 10 years. And those roles really inform who I am today as a professional in a weird way. Emergency medicine in particular. I really love building process and having predictable, repeatable things that you can do. It gives me a nice safety blanket when I'm working. And so EMS really provided that backbone for me. And I bring that now to student affairs.
Yeah, that's great. Because I always joke about, sometimes on the show and many other places as well, like that idea that a lot of people, are like, oh, I never used my college degree or like, whatever I majored in is sort of pointless. But like, I think you just have to like kind of reflect on it. Even the idea of like different jobs that you've had, you probably do kind of carry on different things through to the next thing. But, my line is about like being a history major. Like I just like context for things. So the idea of almost like a curiosity or asking questions to kind of explore and understand, that stayed with me ever since then. But it was a really cool way to kind of look back on a very diverse and unique background that's led you to here today. And we're actually kind of talking with a few different institutional leaders that kind of have unique marketing roles. So it'll just be kind of really exciting. I think all the kind of different ways that marketing leaders can create like a positive impact for prospective students, current students, and all that good stuff. But I know you had a session. If you want to talk a bit about that session at the summit here, just to kind of give that a shout out in that kind of part of your experience while you're here. Once we go kind of through that, we'll talk more about your current role.
Sure. So what brings me to eduWeb, first off, I found out that it's eduWeb is what they...
That's what people could say it, yeah.
Yeah. When I see it, I want to say eduWeb, and I'm just stumbled into that a few times through my presentation. But what brings me to eduWeb or eduWeb is, professional development is really important for me, and learning more of what's going on within the different worlds. Working at a private college, you have your own unique insights, and there's a lot of larger universities that come to conferences like this, and learning their perspectives and their battles and their struggles was really helpful for me to help learn more about the career and the profession, while also getting additional tools, meeting new people. And I actually kind of stumbled into the idea of presenting at the conference. It's been something I wanted to break into for a while. And I saw that they were advertising for presenters, and finding an idea was just sort of kismet. I just came across like, I want to talk about my experience as somebody who's the first embedded communications professional in student affairs. And I was lucky enough to be accepted. So here I am.
Yeah, and we're recording this kind of, right in the thick of it here in the hotel lobby. So there's, you might hear a little background noise, or we'll see what the magic of editing can do for us. But I've known of people with sort of role similar to yours. So I think even just that idea of like that your session is kind of just speaking about that experience. But I think, there certainly can be there certainly can be lessons learned from such a like unique experience as that, just to kind of whether there's other people in a similar position, other people that may want to pursue a position like that, or even just like, seeing the utility in a position like that, that somebody else might say like, hey, we don't have that, but we should, and we're going to look into it. And, we'll maybe kind of, follow up with you to kind of talk about like, all of that. But so I guess just kind of, with your session, like what was it sort of like that you wanted to explore, I guess, if it's sort of just an outline to kind of tease, sort of the, discussion that you had.
As a higher ed professional, especially in communications and marketing, so much of what we do and so much of the advice and so much of the work is around institutional. And we don't see nearly as much information out there about the embedded role, the people who work within a more niche version of whatever they're doing. But there's a lot of us out there. And so I wanted to give insights about what I've learned through my time transitioning from institution-wide to an embedded role inside of an office, and try to give the advice that I feel is most practically usable for people that are thinking about going to the role, who are in the role, and they have a small team. They have a team of 1 or 2 people, so they don't really have a lot of the internal support structures that an institutional-wide position may normally have. But I also wanted to show that those supports and structures are around you. You just have to learn how to use them and make them to your benefit and build those relationships as infrastructure to really make that difference in your career.
I think, building on that, and I think we'll kind of carry this through in our other conversation as well, as the idea of like, how does like context, the environment, just like the idea of being an embedded marketer, within this particular, functional area or whatever else sort of like just shape, just all the aspects of, work that a marketer would do. So I guess just speak to that, I guess, because I think just even with, being a journalist or whatever else, it's that idea of like, if you're trying to tell a story or trying to convince somebody of something, whatever, like trying to contour it around, in a certain way, I think can obviously just make, achieving whatever metrics and goals that you have that much easier. So I guess if you want to speak to that generally and or just sort of like experiences that you've had sort of like, kind of growing into a role like this.
The interesting part about being in an embedded role is that you go from, especially when you're going from institution-wide to this embedded role, in a way, you're becoming another subject matter expert. You're not just a subject matter expert to communications or marketing. Now you're also a subject matter expert within, in my case, student affairs. I understand so much more of the process. And so now it's not just about crafting a strategy around communications or sending emails or posting on social media. It's also about assessing the processes and the infrastructure and how can you fix those things with your expertise and bringing those ideas together. And as I mentioned, being an EMT, I really fell in love with process and structure and protocol. And so that's actually part of how I fell in line with building Slate implementations. But then now I'm building my second one as Ink's kind of whole. Understanding how process and protocol works is really useful for that. So becoming that expert on that structure has really been a unique benefit. And I would say if you're somebody who's in institutional marketing and really looking for more of that in-depth, nuanced structure, this is a great way to go about it. Of course, I'm the only one that is in my office that does communication. So it's a little weird because you're still sort of the catch-all for so much stuff, but you really get to learn and understand way more nuance and become a specialist. And almost like an anthropologist in a way. You study the culture of your office and your division, and you really build off of that, implement off of that.
Yeah, I love that idea of like, that kind of like two sides of the coin of like subject matter expertise, like marketing and also like your area of focus, like that context, that environment. But then even kind of what was resonating with me, and I will kind of follow this thread, is like the idea of, already by the nature of your role, you're kind of getting a sandbox to play in. But then even then, like, like there's going to be obviously like maybe just different stakeholders or different things, but just that idea of like structure is as much about project, process management, workflows, that sort of thing. But that idea of like, okay, we're doing communications, we're going to structure that in a way, to happen a certain way, to be consistent, to, kind of, follow-up style guide, and kind of our voice and things like that. So I think it's just that idea of like, certainly there can be a lot said for just kind of there being some value in trying to kind of like democratize a process of just sort of like, yeah, we want to bring as many people in and, do a bunch of things. But I guess just, yeah, it's sticking out to me, I guess, like how much, certainly structure matters to you generally, and especially in this role. And then that, we have a lot of conversations on this show, and we were here last year and talked with folks who like project management software and different things like that. But the idea of like, yeah, like, just ed tech in general and kind of digital transformation, something like Slate or whatever else, like it's so core to the work of, enrollment folks, and the idea of, yeah, like you're going to maximize that potential by having really thoughtful, intentional, strategic structures to it. I get like the structure piece is really, hitting for me, I guess, for this conversation. So if you want to go a little bit deeper on that of like how all of this applies in sort of the technology context of like how it's been beneficial for you to kind of bring that mindset to setting up, Slate implementations, that sort of thing.
It's interesting because you bring up the sandbox aspect. I mean, there is a value and importance to the structure. And so I don't want to, make that smaller than it is because I spoke about it at length already. But part of the value of it is, like you're saying, the sandbox structure, when you like look at it from the perspective of a creative, because I'm also a creative at the end of the day. I still write. I write in my free time. It's what I enjoy doing. I like reading novels, things like that. And some of the best works can come out of the restrictions that you give it, right? If you give yourself certain word restrictions or certain format restrictions, audio versus video, or, written word, or certain genres, you can come with more creative ideas. Similar aspect here. You have the structures around you, and you can give yourself more of those structures within the role. But then when you do, you can then be more creative in solving the problems. Because the other aspect is that since you're working in this smaller, nuanced area, the construction of the problem solving and the creativity can also really be more enveloped and more nuanced and more fun to try to solve these smaller problems, which you can maybe scale out later, but it's really interesting and reassuring that you can, build those creative problem solving. And then also from there, there's a value in solving those problems on the smaller scale, because you can also see the benefits more immediately.
Right.
And I think that that's a really big value. I mean, you do institutional wide marketing and you fix a problem. Well, you're going to wait a few semesters potentially to see the response. But when you're doing it on the smaller scale, you can see it more immediately. And that feels good, especially if you have anxiety about whether or not something worked. You can find out a lot sooner whether or not it worked. And so that's a real big benefit of this stuff too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think certainly, I guess like all of that would sort of feed, a feedback loop of like, yeah, you're getting feedback, you're getting a response, you're seeing what works and what doesn't. That's going to, you're just closer to the work, and then that's going to, you're going to have more immediate sort of inputs there. And because I think that happens a lot, I think for like, yeah, like anybody who's like trying to, put something out into the world, if you're like an entertainer, and so like sometimes the idea of like, yeah, we spent a very long time making a TV show or a movie, but like maybe you sometimes get the opportunity to like see it with people or whatever. You just sort of like, oh, people like this. And like, so the idea of like, at the very least, you're like, we're doing this for this reason at this time, hoping this happens. And then you're, very likely going to be pretty close to it and get a pretty timely response and everything. So I think, I think like the general point of like kind of referencing like the sandbox kind of metaphor is the idea of, it's obviously very overwhelming for anybody, doing this type of work, where it's just like, we could be doing anything, anyway, anytime, whatever. It's like, we're doing this at this time for this reason to reach, like, you kind of just start putting kind of the constraints and things, because it could be like, if one of those things are missing, there's just, I guess, try to carry the metaphor, like, what if the bounds of the sandbox is just empty, it's just sort of pouring out, and you're like, oh, like, what am I doing here, but like, there's just that the structure, the kind of intentionality, and then like the constraints, which sometimes could be time or resources or whatever it might be. I think that does just I think in so many instances, but especially in these ones where there would be no shortage of ways and directions that you could be pulled in, really sticking to that in terms of just, the plans that you make, but then certainly when it comes to technology tools or whatever, so to kind of segue from that, I get, on the technology piece, always like to try to make some sort of passing mention, have a question about AI, how it's maybe impacting your internal work or anything external as well. But just like take that question as you will, how you're kind of interfacing with AI day to day at this time with your work.
I saw AI and think that this is important subtext to give this answer. I saw AI as the last tech wave that I could ride before technology started passing me by. So I felt that it was really important to just dive in and just go for it. And so I come with that background. So let me just say I've been a little bit more bullish on it.
It's a good way to look at it, yeah.
Because there's going to come a time where we don't keep up with the technology anymore, and that can be the next time the next wave comes. So I wanted to really be one of those people that could speak to it. So that informs a lot of what I do around AI.
Mm-hmm.
So where I see it right now, or where I'm using it right now, I use it a lot to augment work processes on the professional side. And I'm very careful not to allow it to bleed into the creative side. I think that's the human aspect that you want to maintain and control. But I allow it to do a lot of my background processes to try to help me as a small team, as an example, achieve more. And that's the classic argument, right? AI is going to allow you to achieve more with less. Fine. But I am doing that. I am actually letting it replace some of the processes and allow it to sort of replicate the stuff that I already know that I'm going to be doing anyway. And if you can start passing that off a little bit, and it helps you to focus more intensely on the mentally heavy work that has to occur. So that's what I'm doing. I have it scanning my emails for, did somebody important send me something important to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, there we go. I'll go act on that now. That also scares people, by the way, because people see my inbox as an example, and they see the thousands of unread emails. They're like, wow, you have a lot of unread emails. You must be very busy. But it's actually just that I have something telling me. It's almost like a personal assistant. And that's really useful. We also use it in my office when we're creating video to help us get some, AI generative music.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we want to hit a certain mood, a certain feel. We need to, capture something in the music. Well, let's use it in nice backgrounds, to hit that note right. So I'm also trying to build out agents right now. I do that personally, just for my own stuff. So in my personal life, I've actually built out little agents that can do little tasks just because I find it fun and interesting. And so I'm also blending it into my personal world as well,
right?
Which is almost, people may shudder at that thought, but it's really interesting to me. And like I said, it was the last wave that I could ride. I will say though, a big concern, and we're seeing this increasingly from students, is that they don't want to use AI, they're saying, but they feel that they have to. And I think that that's a really dangerous precedent that we're starting to set already. And I guess we just should be more cautious about that, both with staff and with students. Telling people that you have to use AI or making them feel like they have to use AI is really nerve-wracking, especially when, if you're a student, you're trying to set who you are as a person and as a professional. So now we're telling you, but now you also have to use AI to do that, which is literally automated, it's personless. But it's not a good precedent to set. So we just have to be careful about that.
That is like the big existential question, I think. Because I think, obviously there's so many conversations like this happening, which I think is refreshing and important and good, of just sort of like responsible AI. Like, I think we just keep this sort of momentum moving and stuff. It's like, we're the ones building all these tools. Like, we can put the guardrails and limits and, policies or whatever in place, but the idea of, if I'm not using AI, then I'm like the chump, like I'm behind, I'm, whatever. Certainly, a student, I think, is going to feel that anxiety a little bit more acutely, because like you're trying to kind of, build the foundation that will then kind of, build up to whatever your kind of career and life goals and academic goals are. But I think, like at this point, I think a lot of folks are probably in the same camp of like this sort of like, sort of flow in and out of like the professional and the personal, whatever. Like you can just see sort of, that idea of like, like I, have AI helping me to sort out my inbox. Like that's great for work and it's great for personal life. Might start one place or the other and, kind of go back and forth. But I think, just trying to like it sounds like you definitely like keeping an open mind and, making it a priority to kind of, just sort of sample, to prototype, to practice, to, just kind of, not just like stick your head in the sand kind of thing or something, just sort of be like, I don't know, like whatever happens, happens. I'm not, I don't want any part of it. But so, yeah, I think that's a great perspective. Curious, as we're wrapping up, any other trend lines, things that you kind of got your eye on as, looking towards the future, things that you're kind of following in your work?
Yeah, let me just speak one more thing about the AI, and then I'm going to go through the trend lines. Thing about AI that we have to sort of remember, it's going at such a speed and a pace, and I'm far from an expert, right? So let's put those quotes around there, not an
Yep.
expert. But what I'm seeing is that it's just moving at such a fast pace. We're still in the experimentation phase. We're not in the phase necessarily of implementation. And we're just so eager to put into practice what we're playing with. And I think that's something that we really have to be cautious of, especially as we're working with things like student data, personal data, things like that are going to be really like, we have to understand that we're experimenting. We don't know the long term.
Right. Like provide the hype train right now. Let's just make sure we're, staying on the tracks here.
Right. I mean, if it could be great, and it might be, it could be really bad as well. And so let's just understand that we're also experimenting. And so we should give grace also to the people that are using it and who aren't, because we're all in this messy world trying to figure it out right now. Now, as far as the trends that I've been noticing, since I've really worked with students close to daily, the trends that I've been really seeing, the biggest one that stands out to me is the shift in social media. And we all know social media is important. We're all there all the time. But students keep moving away from the social media platforms that we're on. Mm-hmm. And we keep trying to chase them. And maybe we should pick up the signal that maybe there are some we should just let them covet. We started with Facebook, and then we moved to Instagram because the students moved to Instagram. Then the students moved away from Instagram because we were there. And so now they're moving to TikTok. And now they're starting to move away from TikTok a little bit because now we're there. We're trying to be there. They moved to Reddit. We did the same thing. Now they're using different ones. They're using ones like Fizz. And when we want to think about those smaller niche ones that are also using Discord, right? The ones where you have to be a member in order to actually function. They're putting those structures up against us for a reason. And I'm noticing that trend more and more.
Yeah.
So maybe it is time we pause on trying to infiltrate so much of those social media channels and start to understand the new reasons why they exist. And that's a trend that's really stood out to me. As we're so eager and aggressive to get our message out, I can understand that as a communicator, but trying to let them have a space where they can exist in their roles and their personas is really important to them as well, especially as we want them to feel like they belong and are part of it.
Yeah, really good call out. And that perfectly kind of sets up our final question with advice. But I think, that idea of like, do we need to be all places all the time, whatever, in terms of like social media platforms, like, I think that kind of, I agree, like kind of let yourself off the hook a little bit. Like you don't need to be chasing students around different platforms. Cause I think there is a beauty of like, being a part of a curated digital community that also is like absent of like ads and AI slop and whatever, it's just sort of like, I've got my Discord community, or whatever else. And like you're opting into it and it's sort of, a bit more purposeful that way. But, I definitely agree that that's, a trend that's been going on too long, I think, of just like chasing, young prospective students or whatever else on all these different platforms. But so we'll close out as we always do. Advice for other higher ed leaders navigating this moment.
The advice that I would give is trust your students a little bit to get the information. We often think that people aren't getting the information, perhaps because the open rates are weird or funky or click-through rates aren't right. But we have to trust that our students are getting the information that they need. And just because they ask a question doesn't mean that they didn't get the information. Perhaps we actually delivered it wrong ourselves. And I think that that's really important. Basically come in with a little bit of humility ourselves and think that perhaps we could deliver something differently or be more nuanced and understand audiences a little better before we start assessing whether or not the audience is the one getting it.
I like it because I think, the like bombardment strategy or whatever, like that's not necessarily going to be very productive or not. Like if it is, probably not in a positive way. It's almost like a begrudging, like, okay, all right, leave me alone. I'll like, do whatever. But because I think that idea of if you build a like good website, for example, if information's, very findable that way or whatever, like that will like bear out fruit, I guess. And you kind of have to like, trust it a bit of just sort of like, we've got everything. We absolutely know like it is there. It is very easily searchable and findable, whatever. We don't need to just be trying to like bombard, all fronts all the time and whatever. Because I think it's that idea where it's like, we got, enough students or, plenty of students. Just like, but like you just like burned through so much like resources and time and money and, you're just literally burning people out, I'm sure, going that approach and stuff. So I think there's a lot of, talked a lot about in this episode, the structure, kind of the intentionality, all those things, I think just being very important for marketer strategy. And I think it's great just kind of, your sort of anecdotes and speaking to kind of your experience in a unique environment. But I think that sort of advice and the kind of wisdom and things that you've shared here, they could certainly be very applicable to any higher ed marketer out there. So I really appreciate you sharing all you did, taking some time out to hang out for this podcast, and just enjoy the rest of the conference.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to higher ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.